Right, we're now live. So,
Oh, yay!
yeah. Oh, there's Steve. Steve's joined us. Hello, Steve. So,
Hello,
and Liz.
Steve.
Liz is in Singapore, so she's your neck of the woods. So,
Oh,
yeah.
wow. Love Singapore.
Yeah, no, we've got a couple of people in Singapore. Pam's here. Oh, it's Dawn Knox. Haven't seen her for a while. So, there's lots of nice people. Good crowd. Got a good crowd.
Woohoo!
Excellent. Right, should we get going? So,
Yeah.
right. So, hello everyone. I'm Becca Harding and I'm chairman of the Society of Women Writers and Journalists. And welcome to this workshop on body language for authors. So, Steph Holloway is actually joining us from New Zealand. So, she's got her glass of wine there, I think. She's working late tonight. And I've got my coffee. I actually managed to get two coffees. Not quite sure how I did that, but I bought it for myself.
Oh,
So, she's an international expert in body language and her own business, and she has her own business, Elemental Potential. She's been identified as one of the top 30 thought leaders in the world. She's a conference speaker, a coach, and an author, and works with teams within businesses as well. And she's just great fun, and I absolutely love her. So I'm really
aw,
glad to welcome her here
bless.
today. So we'll have a question and answer session at the end, but if you have burning questions for Steph as we go along, there's a Q&A button at the bottom right hand side of the screen, so please post your questions there. Steph, hello, thank you for coming
Hello.
on. So,
Hi.
and I suppose
Wow,
it's nice and
what a
warm.
build up.
Well, yeah. Well, if you could just put the money in my account later for that.
Yay! That's amazing. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So, as a bit of research for this, Becca knows this, but as a bit of research for this, what I did, I went back through some old books, and I don't mean old as in I've had them a long time, like that were written a long time ago. So, ones like Wuthering Heights, which I've just finished reading this morning. So I was trying to figure out, I know when anthropologists, Charles Darwin kind of had those first thoughts about body language. But Paul Ekman was the first person that actually uncovered the science, if you like, in the 1960s. So what I was trying to see by going back through some of these old books was, can you see the body language in books that were written in those days? So that's a couple of the things that I just wanted to throw in the beginning. And just for you to keep in mind that in those days, writers would have used words, and sometimes words that seem funny. Well, they seemed funny to me nowadays because we wouldn't use those words. But we could portray a lot of those things that they portrayed in words, in gestures and micro expressions, and even explaining a tone of voice in the written word nowadays. So I just wanted to kind of put it out there that it's part science, part observation, and part intuition when you really get into body language. So the people that I kind of looked at, I looked at Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, we like her. That's a good choice.
Yes. And so I've got, she used language that although it was often really perfectly formed, I think it was often quite lyrical. That's the word I've got down here. And it was memorable, but it sometimes failed to show us the emotions. So what I did, rather than read the book with that one, I actually watched the latest movie that's on Netflix about it. And I don't know if any of you have seen it, but if you fast forward until there's about 1 hour 40 left, there's this amazing moment where Darcy is helping Elizabeth Bennet up onto a carriage, and up until that point he's been quite brusque with her. So first of all, she's taken aback, I think, because he actually touches her. He actually touches her hands and helps her onto the carriage. And there's an amazing moment where she kind of looks back at him, and that's the first inkling, I think, the first clue you have that they actually like each other, or that she may like him back.
Yeah.
Because in body language, we call that gaze, the 8.2 second look, or some people call it the spark. But the reality is, if two people can hold each other's gaze for 8.2 seconds, that is the spark in body language. If one looks away, then probably one's less interested, but it was really there in that moment. And the other thing that really got me, that I don't know if any other people that have watched the movie would notice, he did this thing with the same hand that he touched her with, his right hand. As he turned away and walked away, his arm kind of came down by his side, and he just shook his hand out. He kind of shook his hand out like that, and it went into very open fingers. So open fingers in body language are frustration. And that one gesture as he walked away, it's almost like he was inwardly saying to himself, oh my God, I should have said something else. You know, he was frustrated
Yeah.
with himself that he didn't make his feelings known to her.
So good
So
acting then.
yeah, and it all happened in nanoseconds. That's the thing.
Mm.
It really happened in nanoseconds, you know. So yeah, I've got that. It all lasts seconds in the frame, and yet it has the ability to shift perception away from a very predictable, he's a pompous ass, and that's all you're
Mm.
going to think of him. Because of course, as the story unfolds, we realise that he's actually a decent bloke. Darcy's a good guy, isn't he? He does lots
Yeah.
behind the scenes. He's socially inept. He can't get his feelings out there, but he does a lot behind the scenes. And as the story unravels, we get to realise what he's really about. And he does it not for want of praise or for his ego. He does a lot of it not knowing whether it'll ever be discovered. So that's what I wanted to kind of lead with, and that body language just adds this extra level of depth and layers and nuances. So I'm always looking for that now in books. And this was, man, Rebecca, this was an amazing opportunity to actually really think about that, because I don't think I ever had. I noticed it in movies, of course, but I don't know if I'd ever really tried to decipher if people that write in a way that you can feel the body language.
Well, one of the things
Yeah.
we get told as writers is to show, not tell. And so the body language for us is really important to sort of convey things without saying he felt angry. You've got to try and convey it.
Yes.
So the body language is essential for writing.
Absolutely. And yep, and it brings them to life, I think, as well. And one thing that I've realized about body language more and more over the years, and especially I read a lot of books. I probably read 3 books a week. I'm a really you said earlier, where do you find the time? I don't know. Honestly, it's the first thing I do when I get up. What I've been doing for the last 10 years, my first 30 minutes of every day has been research about body language. But somewhere over the 10-year mark, I'm like, yeah, you don't probably need to check in every day for 30 minutes and check. So I've started reading for the first 30 minutes of my day instead.
I think you also got rid of your children, which is also really helpful.
And I got rid of my children. Yeah, so I've got all this time left where I'm like, oh, I can make myself a cup of tea and ease into my day. Yeah. So I think what body language does as well, if you can include that, is it helps explain how people get their preconditions. So preconditions, when you're talking about communication, in parts of psychology, it's called this as well, I guess, is, you know, the circumstances by which any person ends up at 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever age, ends up the person they are, the communicator they are. And it's often random, it's often really complex. You know, even 2 sisters that have been brought up in the same household, once they leave home, their preconditions will change because they'll go through different life experiences. Different people die on them and come into their life and do things and say things to them. So I think what body language does more than anything, especially in writing, is it helps explain how people got their preconditions. And I suppose where I've seen that recently, Rebecca knows, I guess it's a teen, because you said your daughters had read them. So I'm like, oh, so is it like a teenage series of books, and a 59-year-old woman shouldn't be reading them?
Yeah. But I think anyone can read them. my
I watched the first movie on Netflix. That's what I did. I watched the first movie and I was so taken aback. Because I'm always looking for the preconditions now, especially in my life coaching work, and especially with men. You know, there's often, like I said, that really random and complex series of stuff that's happened to them to make them end up the communicator that they are. And you could see that in the character of Hardin in Anna's books. So even after the first
we haven't actually said what the book is yet.
Oh, the book is After. The book is called After. So the first one is called After, and then this was very random. On the day after I'd actually seen it on Netflix, because I don't watch that much stuff on Netflix, the second movie launched in New Zealand the very next day and only stayed in theatres for 2 days. It was literally there for 2 days, and then it went straight to video. So so I had a chance in 2 days to watch both movies. And even after the end of 2 movies with the same character, Hardin, going through it, I knew there had to be more. He couldn't end up at such a young age with such very distinct characteristics and something not have happened somewhere else, you know, further down the line. So basically you have to read the next 3 books to figure out what all those preconditions unravel. But what I noticed, having watched the first 2 in movie form and then read the rest of the series in books, Anna does an amazing job of carrying that body language and those nuances all the way through the writing. It was incredible. It's like it just literally jumped off the screen and into the 3 books. So she did a really good job, I think, of describing you know, what his face was doing and whether he moved away, whether he leaned in. It was kind of all there. It was like a very visual book to read. And I don't really know whether that's because I'd watched the movies first, but yeah. So
Claire Buckles said, who is the author, please? So she just wants the details of the book. So,
the author is Anna Ford?
Yeah, I think so.
Anna Ford. I want to say Ford. I'm just going to
Trudy Lewis
now.
is asking the same thing.
It's Anna Ford.
I should have gone and got it from
Anna
upstairs.
Todd. Anna Todd. Sorry.
Yeah,
Anna
Jenny
Todd.
Morsel just said it's Anna Todd. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's after we collided, after we fell, after ever happy, and before. Yeah. So it actually spans around a 30-year. It's a very interesting how it all kind of. And it's only when I speak to people like Rebecca who've still got teenage kids, I'm like, oh, is this a bit like Twilight then? And old ladies aren't meant to read it. But it was such. But the characters, it wasn't just about him. The characters, the way they're interwoven, is just spectacular. So yeah, it's really good. So I've gone from reading that to reading Bronte and Austen and whatever. So how did Bronte do it? These are a couple of am I allowed to say some of the things I sent to you, the words?
I think they were fairly
open-minded.
I think you'll be all right. Yeah, open-minded is the word.
I love the way you looked at the guest list then. I love the way you looked at the guest list to make sure.
No, I think they're all fairly good. We had somebody else on recently who was really quite outlandish. So I don't think anything you're going to say from Jane Austen.
I'm only quoting Bronte.
Absolutely, it's fine.
So what I was trying to figure out is if there was no way, not the same awareness of body language, how did people like Bronte do it in the 1800s? So this is what happened in the first 55 pages. When I picked up Wuthering Heights again, she uses the word ejaculated 15 times. This is in the first 55 pages, and intercourse 7 times. Yeah. So. But of course, back in those days, there wouldn't have been any weirdness or clunkiness about it, because for ejaculated, they would have just have meant quickly. It happened quickly. And intercourse was just a way she described when a group of people were, standing around and communicating, just chatting. So I'm not sure where I'm going with that with the body language, but I just thought it was interesting that the language was very different. They had to use very demonstrative language because they didn't explain gestures and stuff. I just couldn't see those gestures in the book when I finished it this morning in the same way that modern authors would kind of so I've got an example so I've got today we might say her hands were animated as she spilled the story, and you'd have an idea of what her hands were doing. We certainly wouldn't say words like ejaculated and stuff like that. And to show a group of people were communicating, we could use what's called proxemics in body language. So proxemics is lining up your hands in particular to the group of people that you want to feel included. And I've seen this over and over again, especially when I've been teaching people how to pitch in Australia. When you don't include people in that group, so say, for example, you are saying, you've done a great job this week, guys, but you all need to get your sales figures up. if there's people on the outside of your hands, they are literally sitting there going, haha, she doesn't mean me, because they don't feel like they're in those parameters.
Yeah.
So proxemics and where you actually, you know, like zone in who you're talking to and how far it goes out and that kind of stuff is really important.
That's really interesting.
And what the other word that she uses a lot, it was expostulated.
Well, that's one that I use every morning, actually. Yeah, when dealing with the children, I expostulate them all the time. So,
Okay, you
I'm not
have
quite sure what it
strong
means.
disapproval. It's strong disapproval.
Is it? I don't. Yeah,
It means strongly. I strongly disapprove. Yeah.
definitely
So in
relevant
real
to my
life,
children.
we probably wouldn't go. I feel very expostulated about that or something. We'd either wag a finger or, you know, put out a little choppy jab to somebody. It'd be some kind of speech illustrator or gesture like that to let them know that we're thinking that.
I'm going to try that out later and see what kind of reaction I get.
I'm expostulating about what you're doing at the moment, girls.
They'll just look at me like I've
No,
gone a bit
what,
crazy.
Mum? You have lost the plot. Yeah. And so the jabby hand is how we would explain that in more natural body language, I guess. What tends to happen is people use both hands if they're talking to a group of people. And if they're singling out one person or one person should notice more, then your hand would shoot out towards that person. Right. And even then, what happens to the hands, whether it's still kind of pliable or fingers together or fingers open is normally about frustration or exasperation. Yeah. Oh, Liz has got something.
I know, that's what I was just looking at. Yeah.
So. Oh, do you want to ask that now? Or save it?
Yeah, do you want to do it now? So yeah. When we write, should we act it out, observe, and then describe it? Good question.
Oh, well, that's how it works for me, especially when I'm writing and I'm trying to include body language or explain to people. I actually kind of act it out in my head first to see what would happen. And often, even when I'm talking to people, I say, so you see, you had that emotion even before the words came out of your mouth. And a typical example with that is where somebody starts talking and even before they're finished, you know your answer is going to be no. You know, because even while they're still and your hand comes out even before you've said the word no, you know, because the body language goes so quickly in emotions from the head to the fingertips, especially. Yeah, and I have actually got a couple of examples of that, Liz. So how do we add depth to writing by including non-verbal gestures? So, and this was a really, really good one, I think. So this is kind of acted out. So what did Liz say? Do we act it out?
Yeah, and then observe what you've done and then describe it in your writing.
And there's what you've done.
So if you've got an idea for a bit in a book, you'd kind of act it out to yourself first and then see what you do when you're acting it and then describe it.
Yes,
I think
definitely.
That's what you need. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one example I've got that's similar to that is in, and I found it in Wuthering Heights, and it's quite early on in it, and Heathcliff is asked by Nellie. So what's happening at that point in the book is that he feels a bit hard done by because Cathy has decided to marry Edgar Linton, and she's saying, well, I can see why, kind of thing. And Nellie's trying to say to him, have you seen yourself in the mirror? Do you know how handsome you are? You know, like nowadays we'd go, have you seen yourself? Yeah. You know, look in the mirror, you're a really, really handsome man. Yeah, so but in their speak, she says, come to the glass and I'll let you see what you could wish. Because she's trying to compare him to being more naturally handsome than Edgar Linton. But here's where it gets really interesting. She says to him, do you mark those two lines between your eyes and those thick brows, that instead of rising arch, sink in the middle, and that couple of black fiends, dark eyes, who never open their windows boldly, but lurk glinting under them like devil's spies.
Ooh, I like
so
that.
I thought that was brilliant because, I mean, nowadays we'd call that a micro expression. What it sounds like is because he's always kind of very dark and, menacing, he's ended up with these, his lines are always pulled in the middle. He's ended up with 2
Mm.
lines here, you know, where people are always kind of very gruff, and
Yeah.
and his eyes are always a little bit lidded. Yeah. So, and how that works in body language is, what we know for sure is that it takes less than 2 years for a new line to form on your face. So
Really?
that alone would be a really interesting thing for me to include somewhere in a plot. Yeah, people, you know, your mother, especially in England. Hey, in
Yeah.
England, we're taught from an early age, you know, don't do that. Your face will stick like that.
Yeah,
And
that's
you know,
true. I used to say
and
that a lot.
and it's kind of, well, it's true in body language, because if you show the same emotion over and over again. So I just laughed at that point, because it's really feasible to me that if somebody was grumpy all the time, you know, and really was pulling then they end up with 2 very deep lines here. However, because when I said that to somebody the other day, they said, well, you've got those lines. And I said, I kind of have. They're not that deep, but I have got two lines. I'm going to, let's blame my first husband on that. I said, however, here's how it works with, it's called facial mapping. Here's how facial mapping works. When you stop the emotion, you stop time on that line. So you can stop it getting any worse.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so interesting.
That's kind of how it
I'm
works.
going to go study my face in detail later.
Oh, I can pretty much tell what main emotions people have shown, especially if they're bad emotions like contempt or disgust or anger, just from where the lines have formed on their face. Because how it works is, it takes 2 years to form a line. So if the line is very deep, then that's an expression that's shown a lot. If it's a continuous line, it's an expression that's shown a lot. If it's a jagged line that doesn't meet, so stress, for example, would show up in the middle of the forehead. Most people have got 3 lines, but people where the line doesn't go all the way across, it could mean they have had a fairly stressful life, but they've managed it pretty well.
Right.
Yeah. So facial mapping is fascinating.
That is. We're going to have to talk after this.
Yes.
Especially
if it's contempt. No, I've already studied your face when I saw you in Northampton last year.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very sneaky. You see, this is the problem with Steph. You never know what she's working out about you. It's really intimidating.
Oh, and the line I'm always looking for more than anything is the contempt line, because people that show contempt a lot tend to get an extra line down one side of their face. So this is called facial action coding. So to actually make that contempt lip, you know, like the Elvis lip, like, oh, you would say that, you can see what it does. It actually moves just a certain line of muscle. So people that are contemptuous a lot, or, you know, derisive, they genuinely get another line. Yeah,
so
not good to see.
So
So she's talking to him about his wrinkles. Nellie, the housekeeper, she says, wish and learn to smooth away the surly wrinkles, to raise your lids frankly and change the fields to confident, innocent angels, and suspecting and doubting nothing, and always seeing fiends where they are not sure of foes. Don't get the expression of a vicious cur, which was an olden days way for dog, that appears to know the kicks it gets or its dessert, and yet hates all the world as well as the kicker for what it suffers. So she's basically saying to him, you know, your face doesn't need to look like that. You're a handsome man. Like, you're going to end up looking like a vicious dog if you keep making those expressions. I just think that was the only bit of the whole book that I could actually visualize him standing in front of the mirror, trying to figure out if he was handsome, you know, noticing the lines that she's describing to him. It's the only bit that came alive for me in the whole of the book.
That's really interesting. Such a different style to now, isn't it?
It is, but you know, when we're talking about trying to make it leap off the page and become visual, the only way you can do that is in that very descriptive language where you can see it. I could actually see him walking quizzically up to the mirror and just trying to figure that out, or by tone of voice, or, you know, something like that. Otherwise they're just words. So, and I've got this is unwitting evidence that in body language it only takes 2 years to form a new line of your face. So that would be a really good opportunity, I think, in something that somebody writes, to actually put that in. you know, and she
Yeah.
and Prunella got the face she deserved ultimately.
Yes, the
There isn't
study
a
in
Prunella on
changing
here.
no, there isn't.
And I've got a few easy ads. So hey, I've not written a novel, but I have been a writer for a long time in different forms. So I thought, well, what I was trying to think of is easy ads that could breathe different and maybe new life into people that are writing novels and screenplays. So here's a few examples of the main ones that I would like to see in books, because again, they think of the one I've just described about Heathcliff walking up to the mirror in Wuthering Heights. That's the only bit of the book that I could actually see in my mind. The rest, it was a brilliant read. You know, it's not. I've not read it for a long time, since I was at school, and I'm even though when I got to the end, I thought, oh yeah, you know, it brought up all these emotions, but still, that's the only bit that I could kind of remember.
Oh, that's
So
really
here's an example of squelched disgust. So when I was talking about contempt earlier, the two ones that you never want to see are contempt and disgust, where the whole of the middle. And in actual fact, people that show the full disgust, it's almost like someone's got a drawstring bag and pulled their whole face into the middle. But squelched disgust, squelched is a real term in body language. It sounds funny, but it's actually a real term. And what it means is just like kind of a micro version of it. So it can happen really, really quickly. The squelch version might not be, oh God, that smells terrible. It might actually just be like a little flick that's over in a nanosecond, but that's still disgust, but it's been squelched into, like, you know, it's into a teaspoon, almost like distilled. Yeah. So I've got, his nose twitched upwards like a rabbit, barely noticeable unless you were quick. I'd begun to notice this more and more over time, and now saw it for what it really was. The very thought of me now disgusted him, a state that I was doubtful I could ever reverse.
Oh, that's awful. What was that from?
I wrote this. I wrote all of these.
You wrote that? Oh, you wrote.
I wrote all of these as examples to try and show, you know, what you could do, how you could portray squelched disgust. So that was just like, you know, a way of, so what I did, I thought of 4 or 5 different ways that you could include it in. Yeah.
That's
so
really
barely
good.
Noticeable unless you were quick. So twitched would be the key word there. Twitch, because it is just a twitch like a rabbit. That's squelched disgust.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes people don't even have to say anything about it. They can just be looking at you describing something, and you see that little twitch. So sometimes it's the nose goes up, sometimes it's a top lip, and it's really hard to spot. So and sometimes, like I described here, it takes a long time, and then eventually you go, oh my goodness, they're disgusted by that. You know, they don't like that.
So interesting, because I did a webinar for somebody else yesterday, and one of the guys on it was a real problem. Like, he just didn't want to be there, and you could tell, but he kept doing that with his lip all the way through. And
wow.
And he kept putting everybody down and not listening to anyone else's points. It was really interesting, but he did that. I noticed it because I was watching him quite carefully because it was such a difficult session. Yeah, very interesting.
That could have been squelched disgust.
Yeah, and then there's somebody else I know who does the full disgust face all the time during conversations.
Like with the nose fully?
Yeah, like that all the time when you're talking to her.
Wow.
And I kind of got so used to it. I've not really thought about it because she does it so much.
So that's now part of her baseline. It's not, there's no context to link it to anything else. I
don't know. I think she's quite a negative person. She's quite critical. So actually, as a character, like if you're writing that sort of critical person as a character, I mean, she does that all the time. So,
and that would be a good example of what I was talking about earlier, where the emotion, even as the emotion is forming, the body language is happening, even if the words haven't come out yet. So that could be a way of you knowing that, she's not very happy about whatever's happening.
Yeah, no, really interesting.
Wow, negative people. Yeah, so that was an example of squelched disgust. And I think the words that you use would help drag people into that, you know, making it visual as opposed to it just being words on the page. So I think the word there is probably twitched. Rabbit kind of pulls you out of something, because rabbit's not a normal word you would see in a sentence like that. And unless you're quick, I've put it in brackets. So his nose twitched upwards like a rabbit, barely noticeable unless you were quick. I'd begun to notice this more and more, though, over time, and now saw it for what it was. What I could have put in there is, it was me. The very thought of me now disgusted him, a state that I was doubtful I could ever reverse. Yeah, so again, you know, just things that would help drag you in there and let you notice the body language. So, and the next one I've got is the curled lip, the contempt that we talked about. And I wrote this because a guy said to me, he said it looks like an Elvis impersonator, you know, and they go, yeah, when the lip goes up. So for this one I wrote, he was either a part-time Elvis impersonator, or he could no longer conceal his contempt when Jason walked into the room. That curl, be it only for a second, showed every single emotion running through Aaron's mind. Every slight that he could not forgive his boss for, especially for undermining him in front of Rebecca today.
That's pretty good. I love it.
So, yeah, so contempt, you know, most people know what contempt looks like. That's not a difficult one to describe and evoke the body language from it. The next one is about tells, because most people have tells. Do you know what your tell is, Rebecca?
Oh, you're going to tell me now, aren't you?
I'll tell you after.
Yeah, don't tell this lot. That's not fair.
No, I won't. But everybody's got a little tell. Yeah, they've got a tell. You know, when they're angry but they're suppressing it, when they when they're a bit out of their comfort zone or something like that. Yeah, so tells are a really good way to convey vulnerability, I think, in writing. That's how I've always tried to use it. So here's an example. So one of them is called huffing, and the person who does this most in the media that you'd know is not Jason Derulo. What was the guy's name that got accused of beating Rihanna up?
Oh, I
can't think of his name.
I'm not
very famous, like
stuff.
rapper type guy. Probably one of people that.
And his was he was a huff. Teenagers.
he was a huffer. So huffing is kind of that little sniff up when you get angry, but you don't feel like you're in a position where you can portray the anger. You know, you're just suppressing it all the time. So his tell, he was one of my people that I studied in the second year of body language, and I had to watch the same video of him 50 times over and over again. And what he was trying to show is, you know, where he was really angry, but he was just not kind of letting it out.
That's so really
here's what I've got for this one. I'd got used to his little tells by now. How arrogant of him to think that I didn't notice every time. How arrogant of him to think I didn't notice that every time I mentioned the gallery, he huffed. I'd come to resent bitterly that sharp breath in through his nose, which, by the way, was way too Roman. His body language betrayed his anger easily and predictably nowadays, leaving me in no doubt that he felt that I should have remained just a housewife. Yeah, so those little, so I think the word there was, the key word was bitterly. Bitterly was a bit like twitch. So the word that drags you in, a word that makes it visible in your mind's eye, and that was probably sharp breath in. You know, you can imagine yourself doing it. And something else that kind of expresses the emotion of what the person describing it feels like. So that's why, you know, I've put in things like, which by the way was way too Roman. You know, so having a little dig at his nose because being too straight and too perfect, because you can't find anything else to have a whinge about, because he just wants you to say a housewife and not be an artist with your own gallery. Yeah. So you can see where I'm going. I hope you can see where I'm going with this. Those of you that are present, it's definitely not just about describing what the body language is. You've got to draw them in and make it as real as it would happen in real life. And in real life, that's what it feels like. The emotion comes first. Sometimes words are triggers, and then the body language shoots out. And then you do all that kind of observation and intuition, and it's part science. It all kind of comes together, and it happens really, really quickly. But of course, it does in reading as well. And some people read really, really quickly.
Yeah, and it gives them a much more visual. It's like you said, it's the visual thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I've got one for attraction and or focus. So this is the 8.2 second thing that I thought about. And
when you told me this before, I did try it out on a few shop assistants, a postman.
Did you?
No, I'm joking. I could get myself into all sorts of trouble.
You would. You really would.
Do you know, I did try holding eye contact a bit longer, but you naturally get to a point where you think, I can't do this anymore, and you look away, because that 8.2 seconds is a huge amount of time to hold eye contact.
It is. So the gap between the 4.5 and the 8.2 is where it really gets awkward, because up until 4.5 you've really not made any impact on anybody. It's not long enough to form a connection. Around the 4.5 mark is when people start to have that first inkling. They might like you, they might trust you, they might want to buy from you, you know, that kind of stuff. Then there's a kind of grey area where you can get in the weird and awkward and, you know, inappropriate in lots of different ways. And then at 8.2, in 8.2, that whole different chemical kicks in. So when I talk about, you know, part science, certain chemicals do kick in to help you in body language. That's the science part of it. This is the amazing stuff that Ekman discovered back in 1964. So one of them was that the chemical is released 8.2 that literally makes you feel love. You feel love for that person. You feel warm. You feel fuzzy. You know, you want to be with them. So when you're in conflict with people, especially if it's someone that you loved prior to the conflict or still love, then it's really hard to be in conflict with someone that you're looking at for 8.2 seconds.
So actually, it's quite a good way to solve an argument, isn't it? If you're arguing with your partner.
It's a really good way. So when, you know, in the early days of Elemental, I used to do lots of group couples counselling where every Sunday night I made them turn up to this hotel. And the first night they walked in, the lights were very dim and you could see them looking like, oh my God, what's she going to get us to do? Why is there no lights on? But the first thing I wanted them to do was just sit there and look at each other, because when they're already in conflict or already thinking about getting divorced or whatever, or you know, separating, they've stopped looking at each other. They're not used to it anymore. So sometimes just that kind of forcing them, even though it's a bit weird and awkward to look at each other, it brings back like a memory, like a remembrance of, oh yeah, I remember.
That's so interesting. Yeah, get the girls to do that with each other.
Body language before rather than after the dialogue to emphasize any subtext? So the body language before.
Yeah, I think that works. I mean, I've written some pieces recently where I describe what they're doing, or they run the hands through the hair and then say something, because they're doing the body language in preparation, because they're already thinking what they're going to say, but they instinctively have the emotion before they say what they're preparing to say.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, that would work, because that's how it works in real life. The emotion generates the body language, and quite often there's there's a lapse. It's not always in sync, because especially if you're a pretty quick thinker, or it's somebody that you know is going to talk over you or something, then you've already formed your answer, so the body language is already happening in advance. Definitely.
A good question, Liv.
It was a good question. So what was I going to show you for the 8.2 seconds?
Sorry,
well, I just wanted, because lots of novels include romance and people figuring out if they really like each other and that kind of stuff. There's so many ways you can really express that. So I ran a not-for-profit for 4 years just on the body language of attraction, and actually, where I would not pre-vet, but pre-match people. And then I basically put them all in a room and created these events to see if they would naturally find each other. And 12 people got married because of those events.
Really?
Yeah, 12 people got married over the 4 years, and they're all still together.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, more importantly. So it was a bit of an experiment of mine to see if if you match them up, would they find each other in a room, and would they like each other just on the body language? Yeah. So this is one I wrote for that. It couldn't be more obvious that Jess liked Trevor too. If he'd been in any doubt before that moment, surely now Trevor saw it for what it really was. Could he be that oblivious? I wanted to fly across the room and scream at him, "Dummy, what are you waiting for? Can't you see how she looks at you? Everything is pointing in your direction, from her toes to her eyes, which seem transfixed on you, by the way. Say something, do something. This is it, the spark, the moment when if you hold her gaze, she is yours." Yeah, so lots of ways. And feet are really important in those first, especially those first inklings of attraction, because you can't tear your eyes away, but also your feet want to point at people as well. Feet never lie. They're always where they want to be. So if one foot's towards the door, you're probably boring somebody and they're waiting to just, get their moment to get away from you. So attraction's pretty easy in body language, I think, to spot.
Well, you've also talked to me before about people being unfaithful in restaurants and how you can spot them. You should tell them about that, because that's so interesting.
Oh my God. And I'm going to live in this town. So this is the town that I'm moving to in 2 weeks. So I was working there on business a couple of months ago, and normally when I'm in a cafe, I sit with my back to the wall, so I don't see everything. But for whatever reason, this day, this guy showed me to a seat, the guy I was having the meeting with, and he faced me towards the restaurant. So I thought, it's okay, there's only one table in front of us. I'll just look at my papers or whatever and try and block it out. But then this couple walked in, and so I go through this process where I watch them for a minute, not kind of make it look that I'm really staring at them, and I go, oh, okay, so they are, no, more than colleagues, not married the first time. Oh, they're married the second time, because they're still, they're still in that kind of, it still looks fresh, it still looks whatever. And then he started to get a bit fidgety, and I'm like, yeah, maybe not, maybe I was wrong. No, they're just colleagues. Oh no, they're not just colleagues. Yes, they are colleagues. So I went through this big inner wrangle, and I'm like, oh yes, they are colleagues. But so then he did this one thing where he twisted his wedding ring and kind of looked around, and I'm like, okay, now we've got the whole cluster of events. And the guy that I'm having the meeting with, he said, I'm sorry, this must be really distracting for you. And I said, I think we're witnessing right behind your right shoulder the very beginnings, as in the point of impact of a new affair between two colleagues that work together. So he
immediately turns around.
He couldn't resist turning around, because this guy lives there in the town and he knows everybody. And he said, oh, that's interesting. And he didn't say, oh, I'm not surprised, or it's interesting, or whatever. I went back for an event the month after, and they had both left their partners.
Gosh, that's quick, isn't it?
Yeah. So whether or not it had already been happening. Yeah. But body language and attraction and, deception and infidelity and stuff like that is really easy to spot as well, I think. And the other one I've got is one of the ones I've got was about passivity. When people are very passive, that often comes out in their body language as well. So everything about him smacked of passivity. The low flop of his hands when gesturing seemed perfectly in sync with his people-pleasing question. He struggled to make eye contact. His chin was down into his chest. And how was anyone meant to get anything decent out of him? How could a man who could literally take your breath away with those piercing green eyes be so invisible out in the world? Everything within me told me to run, to look for my usual go-to. An alpha male in a sharp suit, a big boy's car with the right badge on the bonnet, and a healthy side of dickness. That's a real word in New Zealand, by the way, dickness.
Yeah, it's not one we use often.
So all of that together you know, trying to show the difference between different types of people and who looks passive and who looks more assertive, who looks more confident. People basically have got this invisible body clock around them. So if you imagine the 6 is kind of on the top of your thighs and 3 and 9 is just above your belly button, Donald Trump lives at 10 and 2. 10 and 2 is up here. This is your narcissist zone, because it's really difficult to live up here, and 12 is lost the plot.
Yeah, well, we actually had a question from Trudy Lewis about any observations you've got about Donald Trump's use of gestures and his posture when addressing a crowd. So since you've mentioned him anyway, I was going to save that one till the end, but you've raised it.
Well, I was watching him last night. My son-in-law is from the US, from New York. So we were talking about them last night. He said, what do you notice in the body language between them? Have you been watching them? And I said, I have. I've really watched them tonight, and all I can say is Biden is class and Trump is crass. And that's what the body language told me. You know, Biden looked different, his clothes were different, his posture was different, his posture was in, so he feels no need to make himself bigger, higher, bigger, whatever, like Trump, to use more space, and yet it was still animated in the right way. Whereas, you know, Trump comes on in his bright orange face and his pink tie, and he's lives at 10 and 2, and his fingers are always in exasperation, and very different. Yeah. Classic narcissist. Really, narcissists are known to live at 10 and 2 is really difficult to live at. Most people live at 3 and 9. Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. You're going to tell me afterwards.
So I'm trying to, there's lots of ways you can talk about whether people are passive, whether people are more assertive, whether they've got confidence, whether they haven't got confidence. And that will all to be do with, you know, like where they operate, whether they're in that, what I call invisible zone. So very low, where you'd be using questions like, if it's not too much trouble, you know, I'm sorry to bother you, but, where it's kind of leaning forward and very low, or whether you're more upright and it's kind of, I'd like you to do this for me now, please. Yeah, and it's more authoritative and assertive.
I'm kind of a mix of the two. So because I'll lean forward when I'm asking somebody to do something, but I'm at 3 and 9 with my hands, and I'm quite upright, but leaning forward from the waist.
Leaning forward's good though, because leaning forward shows motivation and intent. So I always say that if people are leaning forward and in, if you're sitting there, then that's good. You don't want to see people leaning back and away, because that's kind of dismissive. I don't need you in my space. I don't need to be in your space. I don't value you being in my space. It's really different. So that would work. That would work as well if you're trying to describe very alpha males. Because I've got here, as I looked around the event, those men were everywhere, posturing like silverbacks to each other, open legs, that women were meant to notice. I've actually put in brackets, without throwing up slightly in their mouth. And I once, in my early days as a feature writer for a magazine, I once was sent to a very well-known motorbike shop in New Zealand. I was once sent to interview the owner. And when I got there, they were all on 5 or 6 different office chairs with the swirly wheels. And I walked in and they were all sitting like this. All of them. So leaning back, you know, the typical alpha male posture, legs wide open. And I walked in, I went, wow. And the guy said, what? Oh, you're the body language lady. What does all this say then? And I said, it says, I'm the silverback. No, I'm the silverback. No, I'm the silverback. No, I'm the silverback. No, I'm the silverback. Yeah. So, so that's really good ways as well of explaining arrogance and, you know, and it's
what would be the woman's equivalent of that? So you had a group of women, because you do see it. I do see sort of women.
Women is Wonder Woman. So women is standing with their hands on the hips.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
legs
which
apart,
is called Wonder Woman. Yeah, legs apart, hands on hips to give themselves more confidence. So, and these are called body postures. So basically, anytime you make yourself bigger or higher or wider, does send a subconscious message, but it's also that can be one of the chemical reactions as well. So a lady called Amy Cuddy, who is a social anthropologist in the States. She did all the early research on body posturing. So she found out that if you make yourself into a body posture, so that could be a big star shape or a needle if you're into yoga, or Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is actually one of them. And then breathe like yoga breaths for up to 2 minutes. Around the 75-second mark, your body, which it never happens normally in normal physiology, will mix together adrenaline and cortisol. So you've got the fight and flight, the supreme confidence to go on a stage and talk or deliver a presentation, but you're also really calm at the same time.
That is a really useful tip, actually.
It's really, I used to teach it when I was in recruitment. I used to teach it to the people that was going from jobs, and I got the ratio up from 72% to 96 in less than 3 months by teaching them just that. It doesn't last for long. It only lasts for about 25 minutes in your body, but that's just long enough to kind of make a speech or go and public speak or a best man speech, or I've even taught it to dog show judges in the UK. That were a bit nervous. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's quite a scary area, actually. I think a lot of dog owners get quite worked up about it.
Yeah, so lots of ways of explaining. Stress manipulators. So lots of stress manipulators. So stress in body language is minor irritation at the temples right through to worse, end of the world. So one of the most famous examples of end of the world one was Chappelle Corby when she was originally, when her sentence was given. And she just did this, like complete disbelief that she'd been caught out and she was actually going to prison. So for this one, I've been watching him carefully all day as time wore on, the inevitability of his arrogance becoming more and more apparent. It started with simple wipes of his temples with his index finger, and over the course of the day went to a flat palm in the middle of his forehead, which was now glistening with sweat, and sweeping back his stupid hair that looks like it's painted on. I've got to apologise, by the way. I've just realised how many of these are about men.
That's because you do all your man coaching, isn't it?
It's probably that, but I've just thought how biased it sounds, and I'm a bit anti-men, which I'm definitely not. Yeah, so how it works with body language is index finger is always first person, so people will normally do, I wish I could say something about that, or I've got something to say about that. Middle finger is...
So I was just going to say, in that meeting yesterday, because you told me that one of the guys, every time this difficult man talks, he went like this.
He did this.
Yeah. So I knew it wasn't just me. Yeah, I knew it wasn't just me.
Middle finger is normally about third person. So I have something to say about what you're saying. Thumbs are normally about power, and fists are normally about frustration in body language. Yeah. So and then there's the last one that I think would be really good to put in a some kind of written form is what I call wind-up gestures. So wind-up gestures, Trump uses a lot of these. So wind-up gestures are like, shushing people and flicking them away and telling them that you've had enough of them, like enough kind of thing. Yeah. So my final one is, how dare she dismiss me like that? Even without the hurtful words blurted from her vicious lips this time, the body language is mistakable. That flick of her left hand, now commonplace when she's had enough of me, winding me up like a jewelry box ballerina with a flick of her fingers because she's once again bored of me dancing to her tune. So all those little kind of flicks and rolls kind of show when you've dismissed people or you've had enough of them, or yeah, they're called wind-up gestures in body language. So, and there's lots and lots of manipulators. Basically, I mean, most human beings touch their own face, head or hair about 200 times a day.
Yeah, I do. I do that a lot. So she says, scratching her nose.
Each one of those touches, if it's not just, a bee's landed on you or you've got an itch, each of them put in context with what the person has just said or done to you tells you everything. That's the 93% when they say, the verbal language is only 7% of communication. The other 93 is mostly in the manipulators, where people touch, what they do, where they touch, what they touch it with. fills in the blanks for me. That's the other 93%.
Do you find when you're watching people that so you're trying to have a conversation, but you're watching their body language too? Do you get distracted by the body language and lose track of the conversation? Because I would.
Sometimes, and I used to in the beginning more, but what I learned, and it took me 3 or 4 years to learn this, I guess, is that especially when it's two human beings, not just one person talking, like giving a speech or something, there's always a link. So there's always a link, and the link for me is, what has the person just said or done to me, and what was the reaction, and then what was the reaction back. So that's why that book that I wrote was called Ping Pong. I thought, how can I explain this to people? It's like playing ping pong. If you're just playing by yourself, then it'll go nowhere. But that's how it works. Like, you say or do something to me, I have to think what the emotion is about that. I don't like it, I do like it, I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm pissed off, whatever. The body language comes out, and then it just starts all over again. So it's all more about context and linking it. So I don't think I'm necessarily just watching the body language anymore. I think about what caused the person to have that body language.
Right.
So I'm always looking for the point of impact.
So from a writer's point of view, if they're writing dialogue and they want to show emotion through the body language, they need to be playing ping pong with the body language throughout that dialogue.
Yeah, so think about what the person has just said or done to generate that response.
Because your books, the ping pong's a book, isn't it? And it's available on your website if people are interested.
That was a good plug.
Well, it's really interesting. But for a writer, if they want to have a look at how to integrate that into their dialogue, the book would be really useful. So and that's on Steph's website, Elemental Potential.
Thank you. It's not just body language though, that one. It's about compassionate assertiveness as well. So that's where how you can be assertive but not at the expense of other people. Oh, I just missed one that flashed up there, a question.
Is there any way to neutralize someone's aggressive body language?
Oh, that's a great question. My favorite, people ask me this all the time, what's your favorite go-to body language move? And I call it the slow unfurl. And it's kind of, imagine where my waist is, kind of I do it on my solar plexus, my belly button. And it's not that, it looks like that. It's just a slow unfurl, but it's from kind of your belly button. So what it is, even as people are getting aggressive and loud towards you, you're already sending off those messages that it's not acceptable, but in a more polite way than just going, no, stop being. So I like to do that. Other really good ones are suppression. So suppression is this, why don't we all calm down? This would be, I'm sure we can smooth this out. You don't need to get angry. And what people tend to do is they will actually go out to the person if it's more important that the other person listens, and they'll bring it into them if it's more important to them and how they feel. So
I remember this
again, it's all about the proxemics.
That's really true. We've got a few other questions out. Are you because we're on to questions, aren't we? I think now.
Cool.
So Jenny Walsall says, so Botox is making it more difficult. So is Botox making it more difficult to read body language? Great.
It's making it more difficult to read stress indicators, definitely, because the face and the eyebrows just don't move in the same way. However, that doesn't mean that you can't see stress. It will just come across in some other way. Because there's lots of ways that people show stress. And a typical one that people would show stress if you can't see it in the face, they could be leg jigglers. People use self-soothes where they will pat themselves or squeeze themselves, or play with jewelry, play with something that's important to them. So there's lots of other ways that people show stress. Like the guy in the restaurant was playing with his wedding ring because he knew he was doing the wrong thing. So that alone wasn't a sign of infidelity, because that also could have been, people will also often play with their wedding rings if their partner is a main support person for them and they want a little bit of a mental boost. But you put all the other clues together, all the clusters, and it's exactly what it looked like.
Yeah, it's a context, isn't it? It's all together. So Pamela Payne also says, all this would be useful when writing a detective novel. Do you help the police during interrogation?
I do. Yes, I do. So a recent one I've done last year is helping a team of 14 detectives figure out how they could cut down the amount of questions that they ask. And so typically they will show me, under strict confidentiality, of course, a video of an interrogation. And in one that I can think of, they actually had the answer at question 13, but it took 53 questions in the video.
Really?
So what's happened by 53 questions is you've got a very demoralized, despondent person that's been interrogated, and they'll often they've kind of lost the will to live at that point. You know, they've just been beaten down. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll get any better information out of them. So when I watched the video, you know, it would have just been something about a micro expression or something on his face, and I said, but you had it there at 13, you know, and you asked another 40 questions basically.
That's really interesting. So you're going to write a book for people writing novels about criminals to help them with setting up their interrogation. You should do that.
It'd be an interesting theory. I don't think it's a favorite part of my work, if I'm completely honest, because in the same way that I don't teach deception anymore, because I studied just deception for over a year. And all I say to people normally when they ask me about deception is, it wouldn't serve you to know what I know, because it doesn't serve me. You know, it makes me cynical, it makes me super observant, it can make me ditch people halfway through a coffee. You know, from one question, and one is never good for first dates. Absolutely never good for first dates.
No one ever tells the truth on a first date.
So yeah, there's so much. I mean, I think I showed you earlier when you said, you know, about deception. That's module 4 in when I teach it. You know, I teach it as like a 10-week class. There is over 200 different ways you can spot deception alone. It's huge.
So if a writer wanted to show a few aspects of somebody lying, what give us 5 or, you know, a couple of different things they could add into their text?
Well, I think that in real life murders, because I studied deception, and so in the cases I studied that year, one was Chris Brown. That's the guy I'm thinking of. One was Chris Brown tells. The huffing, the sniffs, Chris Brown and Rihanna. So I studied Chris Brown, Chappelle Corby, and then 2 murderers. And one of the murderers was Gary Giordano, who supposedly took his wife to the Caribbean. They were out snorkeling and she drowned. What had actually happened is he'd held her under because he wanted to get rid of her and get the insurance money.
Nice.
And so he was interviewed for so long, and they'd basically given up on him. And then they called in this one other guy from the FBI to question him, and he said, you're asking the wrong question. When you're up against somebody like him, you can't be asking him if he's done it. You've got to tell him he must be relieved that he didn't do it, and then see what happens. So he took completely reverse engineered it and totally turned it around. And what happened at the point where he said, so Gary, you must be really relieved that you've been exonerated now, and it looks like you can go home and finally put your wife to rest and, you know, bury her like you wanted to, and try and reform your life, mate. You know, so word mate, trying to form bonds with him, exoneration. So again, key words, trigger words that link those emotions. And then at that point of time, and I think it was somewhere around the word where he said, so you must be relieved that you've been exonerated. He showed this one micro expression, which is called duping delight. And it's that kind of smirky little just flick of your mouth that shows you think you've got away with something. That's very important in detective novels and murder novels and stuff like that, because it's the one that shows up most often in real life with real murderers, at the point where they think they've got away with it. Somebody even asked me today in my class this afternoon, so did David Bain do it? He's one of New Zealand's favourites, but he never showed duping delight. He made himself virtually unreadable. That's why nobody ever really knew whether he did it or not.
That is so interesting.
So duping delight is one of them. I'm trying to figure out which ones would be most useful as well. Slips of the tongue is another way. That would be really good to include in a writing, I think. So Freud was the first one that figured that, where you say one thing and you really mean another.
Yeah.
What would be another good one? One of the easiest ways, I think, is that people often will say things like, to be honest, or I'll be honest about it. Yeah. So that's kind of reinforcement statements. And people over embellish, I think, as well. So a typical example that I often tell is one of the murderers, one of the stories he told, they were trying to figure out where he was and what his alibi was. And he over embellished a story where he could have said, I was just at the pub. I wasn't there. I was at the pub with my mate. Instead, he said something like, I wasn't there. I was at the pub with my mate. The reason I remembered I was there at 5 o'clock with Dave is because he was telling me about his dog that had blim, and it just went on and on and on. So too much detail. So that's another sign of deception as well, that people are trying to over embellish a story, So that would be
so when I asked my daughter, my daughter, she'd eaten the chocolate cake, and I get a long list of reasons why she wasn't in the area at the time, despite the chocolate round her mouth. Yeah.
Depending on the age, because up until, I don't know, maybe 18 or 19, they do that thing where they might touch the end of their nose as well. Because kids get, when they know they've got the intent to lie, they get an extra flush of histamine down their nose, which makes their nose hairs flap around. That's why they often scratch the end of their nose.
Yeah, and she goes pink and her eyes get really big.
And then if you want 5, the 5th one would be what's called non-contracted denials in body language speak. And the easiest, best one I've ever got to describe this is Bill Clinton. You've just busted my teenager. Somebody did that. So non-contracted denials are over formal language. So if one of them is stretching stories out and over embellishing them to try and prove their point, the other one is over formalized. So Bill Clinton, when asked if he'd had sex with Monica Lewinsky, could have just said, I didn't. Or I didn't do that. That's not true. He could have, but it would have had an apostrophe. So non-contracted denials have never got an apostrophe in anywhere. That's an easy way to explain it in writing terms, because instead he looked at the camera and he says, I did not, emphasis on the T, have sexual relations with that woman. It was over formalized. Yeah, so that's one way as well that you could spell it out in writing, I think, as well.
That's really helpful.
Sorry if I've just busted your daughter. Yeah, that's a common one in children, because when they already know they're going to lie to you, again, this is one of those where the physiology just helps you out or doesn't help you out. For about 8 seconds, they get an extra drop of histamine. It's like, I'm going to lie to mom. And then they go, did you really walk the dog this morning? Yes, mom.
Yeah, I think we should do a whole session just on teenagers, actually.
Teenage deception. Yeah, so there's a lot with deception, I think, that you could build into detective novels and things.
Sounds like you should probably do another session for us, actually. We'll end up having one for different types of books, depending on what people are doing. Right, script writing. Are the gestures written down to help the actors? So
that would be really useful. They normally are in script writing, aren't they?
I think so.
It would be in brackets or little notes underneath or something.
Yeah, Liz might be able to help us with that, because she's a script writer, so she might have a comment about that.
If not, that's why you can see in the writing that I've done, I've actually put it in brackets, and I've just put stress manipulator ? Passive body language. Yeah.
Oh,
or it should be implied in the dialogue. Yeah,
that's what she said.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And then Dawn Knox says, is body language different for people who show autistic tendencies? Could autistic people's body language be misconstrued?
All I will say about that is, yes, it can, but they would still show usually all the same emotions that anybody else would. Maybe it manifests in a different way, in the same way that every single person has got their own baseline. So if you don't show stress in a certain way, you'll do something else. Yeah, and interestingly enough, I've just watched the first episode of something called Good Doctor, which I don't know if you get over in the UK,
Yeah,
but
well, I don't know, you might do it.
it's about a doctor that's autistic, and today's one was bang up to date because it was all about in the very early days of COVID and what they were coping with in US hospitals. And there's a moment, priceless moment, where he's in the staff room and he realizes that all the doctors and surgeons have got body language on, have got masks on, and he said, now you're all in the same boat as me. This is what it looks like for me. I
That
can't
is
read
so
body language.
brilliant.
He said, now we're all the same,
Yeah.
so you all have to just listen to the words because you can't read the faces. And that's often what it feels like for an autistic person.
That is a
They
brilliant
don't
comparison.
pick up on those subtle nuances. However, it doesn't mean they don't feel the same emotions. They'll just show them in a different way.
Yeah. And I used to, well, my cousin, when he was little, because he didn't speak at all, and he's very severely autistic, and he used to have very exaggerated body language. So if he was frightened, he would go into full fetal. Right in the middle of the supermarket or something. So it was the same body language, but just to a much greater degree. And yet I've got another friend who's an adult who's quite badly autistic, but not as bad as that. And he's more difficult or people make more mistakes with him because he's close enough to having sort of everyday body language, but then sometimes he kind of expresses things slightly differently, and that's when people make the mistakes with him or think he's being aggressive, when it's just that he doesn't express things as gently as somebody else would, and so he quite often gets picked on by people in pubs and things because they think he's being aggressive, but he doesn't know how to communicate very well. So they'll, you meet some guy who's not particularly friendly and he'll take offense, and he has a lot of problems like that, actually.
Oh no.
But he's had they teach a lot now with autism on how to match people's body language and things. So there's quite a lot of work, I think, that's gone on with that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's not necessarily about matching. I know they're trying to form some links now to see if similar things happen with autism that happens with dementia patients, because I'm working with a nursing home here at the moment, actually, in a dementia unit. And one of the things I'm teaching them is follow the body language, not the language, because if they've not got the language anymore or can't remember the language or the words or whatever, the emotion forms the body language, remember? So the body language will never lie. At least it will tell you when they're uncomfortable, when they're frightened, when they're scared or whatever. Yeah, so especially in dementia patients, it's better to follow the body language than the words, because the words might not always be true.
That is amazingly interesting. What a lovely work to do. That's must be really rewarding. Yeah. So anyway, that's all our questions. I don't think we've got any more. So no, there's one more. Yes, please. Another Pamela says, yes, please. Another session would be great. Since seeing your first webinar, because Pam came to the first one, obviously, that you did when I was for another organisation that I'm involved in.
Cool.
I've been noticing when people lie. Characters in films and Prince Andrew.
I haven't seen Prince Andrew recently. I'll have to watch something of him.
Yeah, there's probably some on YouTube about all the things. So, and they want to know your website. So it's
the website is elementalpotential.com.
Elemental Potential.
So to show that I'm not anti-men, if there are any men in the room as well, there's a man coaching page on my website, and one of the articles on there is called "How to Be the Most Compelling Man in the Room with Your Body Language."
Do you know what? I haven't done that to the attendees. Let me write that again, because I just did it to us. It's not much use, is it?
So there are a few bits. And I used to have online video learning, but the videos have got quite old. So I've just removed that. And instead I'm doing more of these live ones. So what I need to figure out is a really good time for the UK as well, that I could do ones like, I've recently had a sellout couples, body language for couples, how to really get to know your partner more. Because what I find is, even after like 20, 30 or 40 years, if you say to people, what's your husband's baseline, or what does he normally do when people can't tell? They don't know.
Yeah, that's That's really interesting. Yeah, I think,
but it's 20 years. You've lived with this person. Why don't you know?
See, I think we can see a whole range of webinars now. It's sort of how to portray bad relationships, crime novels. We'll go through the whole range. But no,
it's a super interesting concept for me. Thanks for asking me. I'd never really thought about it, because I've always noticed it in movies. Yeah, you imagine what it would look like if you could bring that to life in a book.
Novel.
Yeah.
No, well, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time,
You're
Steph.
welcome.
This has been a really good session. I'm sure everyone else has really enjoyed it as well.
Thank
So
you.
so anyway, you've got her website and you can download her ebooks on body language, and they're really easy to understand. They're great books, and they would help with your writing as well. So go and have a look at those. And she's also got her virtual training sessions on there as well. So you can sign up for
you're
those.
welcome.
And
Thanks, Liz. I'll send you the. Do you want me to send you the running sheet as well if anybody wants it? Or
yeah, that would
send them out, or
yeah. Yeah, we'll sort that out afterwards. You can perhaps you can send it to everyone so they've all got
Somebody's
your email
put yes,
address
please.
well.
That's an emblem, by the way. Emblem is.
The trouble is, you know so much. It's like you just want another 4 hours with you. So and you've got a great course going on your how to create connection during Christmas, haven't you? Which I spotted.
Yes, that was so popular last year that I've had to do it again. How not to kill each other over Christmas. Yeah. Or how to like people better than you liked them last Christmas, whichever way you want to look at it. Yeah.
The other option is just going to lockdown and then you don't have to see anyone anyway. So
I've been invited for the first family Christmas with my son's new in-laws, and my daughter-in-law rang me tonight and she said, "You're not coming for Christmas with us?" I said, "Oh, I've been on the road so long. I've had like 10 Christmases alone. I'm actually really happy just being on the beach with my sandwich and a bottle of wine."
Actually sounds quite appealing. I might be on a plane. Wouldn't be allowed into New
for the
Zealand
first time in like 10 years, I've been roped into this family Christmas. So I'll be honest with you, it might be completely overwhelming for me, and I'll disappear with a book. I'll just bring 3 books.
In a corner.
Yeah, we'll see.
Oh no, that's great. Anyway, we've got our next session on the 19th of November at 1 o'clock, which is a workshop about publishing on Amazon, which will be really interesting. So, well, thank you everybody for joining us. I hope you've had a good time today. I mean, I've learned a lot from it and I really appreciate Steph's time. So thank you so much for joining us. And I'll see you all again soon. So bye.
Thank you. Bye.